called Mama. She was so happy she cried. She wants you to have her wedding gown. It's white lace.
Yeah, that's good. I can't get married in your mother's dress.
You are wonderful.
Thank you. I've worked hard to become so. I admit it, you are better than I am. Then why are you smiling?
Because I know something you don't know.
And what is that?
I am not offended.
Well, sir, you were a cowardly son of a bitch. You just shot an unarmed man.
Well, he should have harmed himself. He's gonna decorate his saloon with my friend.
That amuses me to no end, that week after week, randomly, we wind up using the intro with that ending on it. Young boy cut down in the prime of his life by little Jawas who drive hearses in the California coastline. Wonderful. Hi, I'm Mark, and Tom is away this week, so I'm going solo once again on the Cinemaniacs. You can see how as excited I am about being here. I can't even talk straight. So I braved it alone on this festival of fearsome filmic features that I'm going to be discussing this week, and boy is Tom glad he didn't. Up first, segues are for children. What do you do when you have a handful of youthful reptilian creatures who are very good at the martial arts, and there's somebody is doing bad things in the city? Who are you going to call? You're going to call the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So if you watch this little program of ours, I hope you get the impression that while I can only speak for myself, I often poo-poo a lot of big-time Hollywood stuff. I'm not a snob about this. I mean, if I can segue to the left a little bit, I watched Sharknado 2 this weekend, and it was great. I don't know what Tom was talking about. I had a great time with it. So I'm not above anything that's lowbrow and kind of goofy. It just has to have a smidgen of a brain and has to be entertaining and show me things I haven't seen before. So I went into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles not having any love for the material. I was a little older than the target age when this first hit in the 80s, and I always was kind of just not interested and kind of dismissive of it. I saw the second of the original feature films. They made 3 live-action movies back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I remember thinking the second was better than I expected it would be, thinking it wasn't going to be any good. So going into this, I went in pretty neutral. I'm like, hey, maybe they can make it better than they did before, but I'm not sure that they did. I went to see this with my sister, her husband, and her 2 young daughters who are ages about 6 and 11. The kids liked it, although, to be honest, you don't see the turtles for a good chunk of the movie. It's maybe 40 or so minutes before you really see them. They sort of do, they do what a lot of superhero movies and older horror movies do, is that they tease these characters a bit. You're really with the April O'Neil character, played by Megan Fox, who's an intrepid TV news reporter who's trying to find out what group of vigilantes, or vigilante singular, is thwarting the efforts of this thing called the Foot Clan, which is some evil bad guy group who are committing crimes in the city. You're more with the Megan Fox character than you are with the Turtles, really, for most of the movie. You see bits and pieces of them during some fisticuffs earlier on, and then finally they sort of, the Megan Fox character and the Turtles come together, and then you're with them the whole time. So while my youngest niece was sitting next to me, she was getting pretty restless, and at one point she leaned over to me and said, "I want turtles." And I'm thinking, yeah, I know, this movie's called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we're not seeing a lot of them. It's kind of like the Godzilla movie earlier this year. Ultimately, you do get the turtles, and you get them for the duration of the film, and there's a lot of fight scenes and all that kind of stuff. I had a hard time telling the turtles apart. They're all very dark. The whole thing is shot fairly dark and shadowy. They live in the sewers and creatures of the night and all that sort of thing. So the really only way to tell them apart, other than they have different voices, but you're not really sure who's saying what most of the time. They have different colored headbands over their eyes. But again, because it's so dark, you can't even tell the colors apart that much. So to me, they were just a bunch of turtles who crack wise and spout off a lot of pop culture stuff that I found mostly annoying. My friends and I always had this saying, we used to have this routine called, you know your movie sucks when, and certain things that a lot of bad movies have in common. And one of them is never reference a better movie in the movie you're making. And they did that a lot in this one, and it kind of made me laugh to myself, because I'm like, you're breaking the rule and you're indicating that this movie sucks. But at the same time, I guess the turtles are supposed to be raised watching pop culture on TV all their lives, so they're, like any teenager, they're throwing a lot of references out. So I guess that's legitimized that way. My biggest beef, and if you know what the word sing along, is that so much of the action in this movie is hard to follow. It's not, the worst offender of the shaky cam garbage that we see all the time, but so often the camera, you have a turtle and the camera is going around at every angle and it's like, whoa, what the hell am I looking at? Or martial arts are occurring and you're looking at the back of somebody who's doing something rather than the front. And it seems like the camera and the editing are always just missing what should be impressing me. Like fisticuffs happen and then somebody's laying on the ground. Well, I know that somebody is victorious over somebody else, but I'd kind of like to see how we got from point A to point C, and point B is missing in there. So there's a lot of over the top. It's a Michael Bay produced film, so you've got if you like the Transformers movies, there's a bit of that vibe. The evil character of Shredder, who is big in the original stories, is in this, and he looks, to my eye, a lot like a Transformer. Probably no accident there. It's available in 3D if you want to see it that way. We chose to do that. And I thought the 3D was pretty good for the most part. There's a lot of shots from up high in New York City looking down, and you get a lot of depth that way. There's not a lot of coming at you, but a lot of movies just tend to not do that, and for whatever reason. So we went 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, and the crowd was smaller than I expected it would be, which was interesting. But there was a lot of laughs, and a lot of kids seemed to enjoy it. So I may be the exception to the rule. My sister and brother-in-law both enjoyed it. They said they were glad they went. They didn't think they would like it. I think if you're a fan of the material, well, see, this is what would be interesting if we had a fan of the material to talk to, because if you're a fan of this from way back when, it's possible you're bringing a lot of goodwill to the game and you like it better, or it's possible that this is so different from what you remember, you don't like it. I really haven't talked to anybody who's seen this that has those feelings. All I can speak for is myself. And it was passable entertainment for me, but ultimately I thought it was kind of dull, and to be really shallow, the best thing about it was Megan Fox, because she was nice to look at for 90 minutes. But other than that, the movie was just kind of silly and throwaway. And maybe this is one where, now that they have kind of the origin and introduction out of the way, maybe a further adventure, which they've already apparently greenlit a sequel for 2016 or 2017, I'm not sure. There's a sequel coming because it made a lot of money. Maybe the next one will have gotten everything out of the way and just be a solid adventure and be a bit better. The jury's out, we'll wait and see on that one. Up next, speaking of special effects, a group of tornado chasers struggling valiantly to find something to point a camera at that resembles a tornado gets more than they bargained for when they go into the storm. And they all die. So, what that trailer does not tell you, which I wish I would have known before I went to the movies, because if I had known I probably wouldn't have gone, is that this is a found footage movie. This is everybody in the world always has a camcorder that's always running for some reason movie. So I sit down to watch this thinking, okay, this is going to be some Twister knockoff, maybe with better special effects in terms of, it's been a decade or almost two since Twister came out. But it starts off with, it's this group of storm chasers in this like souped up, armor-plated, looking like something out of the last third of an A-Team episode, or Mad Max, or Damnation Alley. This thing they have that's tornado-proof vehicle with all these cameras mounted on it, and camera guys that are always filming, including when they're pumping gas at a gas station for some reason. It cuts from this setup, and I'm like, oh God, it's going to be one of these, to some annoying kid who's doing a video yearbook interviews with all of his classmates, so that's a reason that you get the Beat storyline always having a camera on it. And again, sing along if you know the words, I hate found footage movies. They're annoying, they're an excuse for bad acting, bad writing, bad camera work. I've never seen a found footage movie that wouldn't have been far more effective as a regularly shot narrative movie, and this just bears that out. I'm taken out of the movie. There's a scene that you see clips of in the trailer where the tornado comes at a school that's having a graduation ceremony, and all the families and students are in the corridors of the school, and they're running through the corridors. And then there's some kid who's always shooting everything for some reason, and when you can't get a shot from his camcorder, you cut to the security camera in the hallways, and it says, security camera in the corner. And at that moment, my eye goes from being concerned with the people running through the hallway, where are they going, are they going to survive, to looking up at the text in the corner and saying, security camera. Oh, so this isn't the camera by the other kid, blah, blah, blah. It's taking me out of the storyline. Anybody who's making movies currently or wants to make movies in the sound of my voice, knock it off. This is annoying, and it's crap, and it's hack, and this is going to be something that people look back on once people wise up and this cycle spins out. this is going to be looked back on in shame, and nobody's going to want to watch these movies anymore because they're garbage. You don't care about anybody in this movie. The characters are all cliche and paper thin. I was kind of rooting for them to just all get sucked up into the tornado, and I actually was giggling when somebody did get sucked up into the tornado. On fire, no less. That was even better because he was one of those guys who never stopped shooting things. You don't really recognize anybody in this movie. If you're a fan of The Walking Dead or Prison Break, Sarah Wayne Callies is in this, and you saw her in the trailer briefly as one of the storm chasers. And Matt Walsh, who you may know from Upright Citizens Brigade, or he's currently on Veep, is in it as well. But otherwise, it's just throwaway characters, and you're just sort of like looking at your watch, waiting for the storm to come. When the storm finally does come, people ultimately sort of get trapped in a storm drain, and that was marginally interesting at the time, but again, I'm so taken out of what I'm supposed to be invested in emotionally because I'm thinking about, why is the person still pointing a camera at this? At some point, somebody is trapped in a building cave-in, and you see him take the time to set up a camera to point it at himself and his girlfriend where they're trying to dig themselves out of the rubble. This is stupid. This is ridiculous. So beyond the logic, and I guess a lot of people don't have a problem with that, but there are these two redneck characters who are like YouTube sensations or YouTube people who do dumb stunts, and we keep cutting back to them, and it's just annoying and tedious. And I mean, seriously, Hollywood has gotten to the point where they're so desperate to be cool that they're emulating YouTube videos? Really? I'm going to cut an album that sounds like I recorded the vocals on somebody's answering machine circa 1983. Maybe it's going to be a big hit. So I don't know who this movie's for. This is really no better than movies that the Sci-Fi Channel puts on. Again, if I can reference Sharknado 2, I watched that right after I got home from seeing Into the Storm, and it was infinitely better. I will say the Sharknado 2 effects weren't quite as good, but I cared about the characters. It was exciting. It was funny. It was a story that didn't make me roll my eyes. It was intentionally silly, but hey. Into the Storm was just crap, I thought. And it really fits the definition of crap. Crap is what your body can't use and is useless, has no nutrients, and it's being expelled. And I feel like Into the Storm is the studio version of this. This is some movie that has nothing good about it and is not useful for anything, but they have to kind of get it out there to get rid of it, so they're dumping it at the end of the summer. I would say seriously, rent Twister again, or even more seriously, rent both of the Sharknado movies. You'll have a lot more fun than I had with Into the Storm and the other 4 people who were in the theater. This was really pretty bad. Up next, Michael Douglas, Diane Keaton, and I don't want to give anything away, a cameo by Rob Reiner. Michael Douglas is a man who is crotchety and old and has a bad relationship with his son, and unfortunately has to take care of his son's daughter, who he's never met before. And so it goes. So I didn't know really anything about this movie going into it. I hadn't seen any advertising, and if I hadn't seen the poster on Keene Cinema's website, I wouldn't have even known who was in it. My parents came to see this with me because they were coming to town, and I said, "You have your choice. Toss a coin. It's Tornadoes or it's Michael Douglas and Diane Keaton." And they went with Michael Douglas and Diane Keaton, so we did that. Funny enough, the last time they came to see a movie with me, we went to see Jersey Boys, which they both loved. My father, every time I see him, he tells me it's the best movie he's seen in years. So it's in the same theater, the same of the 6 screening rooms as Jersey Boys was, and I thought that was funny. And then we sit down and the opening credits of this movie start, and then Frankie Valli's name comes up in the credits, which I just started laughing out loud, that what's the coincidence that the 2 movies we see together over the course of months both are about Frankie Valli at the same theater in the same cinema. So I said, if the next thing they come to see has a Four Seasons song in it, something is, the stars are aligning and it's time to play the lottery. So this is not the comedy that it's being advertised as. This is really much more of a drama than it is anything else that focuses with Michael Douglas as a widower and Diane Keaton as a widow, and them dealing with being the age they are and missing their spouses, and then Michael Douglas dealing with his drug addict son having to go to jail and dealing with this granddaughter he's never met before and all this. It's a lot. It's pretty heavy and dreary for the most part. There are jokes and there are lighter moments that they've probably wisely tried to market this film as a comedy, because I think if they marketed it as what it is, it would look too unpleasant for a lot of people to go see. Talking to some folks at the theater before seeing it, they saw it and enjoyed it. My parents both liked it, and people in the theater seemed to laugh. So again, this might be one where it just was not something that I was into. I think I went in with the assumption that it was a comedy from the cast and the poster, and not getting the comedy that I thought it would be probably hurt my enjoyment of the film. If I had heard this was a drama, I might have felt a little bit different. But I did think it was kind of slow and pretty unpleasant and dreary a lot of the time. Ultimately, it's Hollywood. It's a Rob Reiner movie, so there's a happy ending. Don't want to give anything away. And ultimately, it is a positive, life-affirming, filled with heart and tenderness kind of movie. So I think there is an audience for this. And I'm also always pleased when there's a movie for people who are not 12-year-old boys in the theater, because it's kind of like the only one they're showing right now at Keene Cinemas that's not aimed at people with a short attention span who like loud noises. So this is cool. This is cool. I mean, if you're an AARP member, you may want to go see this movie. I think it's nice to see people your age in issues you can relate to on the big screen. But if you're expecting the comedy, I would be forewarned before you go in that it's not really that. So that's all that we had in theaters this week, mercifully. I was having an episode there. Maybe it's time for my AARP card. We thank our friends at Keene Cinemas for providing these to us and to the community at large. And as is often the case, the conversations I had with the people behind the counter were better than the films that I saw this weekend. Speaking of good conversations with people behind the counter, we then move on to thank in advance our friends at Video Headquarters for the following filmic features we will be discussing. The royal we, of course, because Tom's not here, and he's probably glad he didn't see most of these. Up first, we have the latest feature featuring our fabulous furry felt-lined friends, created by Jim Henson and co. years ago. What happens when Kermit the Frog is thrown in a Russian gulag after somebody who looks like Kermit the Frog was busted out of a Russian gulag who is a thief, and they think Kermit's the thief, and then all the Muppets get involved, and they become the Muppets Most Wanted. This was a lot of fun. I like this a lot. I really liked the last Muppet movie, creatively entitled The Muppets. This was originally, if you watch the opening, I figured this out when I watched this in the theater, and it was borne out by an interview that I heard. Originally, this was going to be titled The Muppets Again. And it's funny because there's this big opening song and dance number. I mean, this movie begins exactly like to the frame where the previous movie left off. And then it turns into this big song and dance number about this being a sequel. And there's a lot of very clever and amusing references to, it's the same thing again. It's only going to be 60% as good, that sort of thing. Although I think this is arguably just about as good as the previous Muppet movie. You might say this is a remake of The Great Muppet Caper, which was the second Muppet feature film, which involved jewel thievery and criminals and things like that. But if it is, it doesn't bother me. It's different enough, and it's a lot of fun. Good. The music is very catchy. The songs, you're going to have a hard time getting out of your head afterwards. It is loaded with cameos from movie and TV and music stars, a lot of which I was really shocked they got to be in this movie, either because of the magnitude of the star or because it's just, didn't expect to see Frank Langella in a Muppet movie, or Danny Trejo, or Christoph Waltz, and I don't want to give away any more than that, but it was just really funny and cool to see these people, getting a little silly or spoofing themselves or whatever. And you have pretty much the entire Muppet gang, and they even go with some of the characters that you only ever saw on the TV show. So this is pretty cool. If you're a longtime fan of the Muppets, it's like the previous film. It's very nostalgic, and it's totally in line with the previous Muppet efforts. Arguably better than some of the later original Muppet efforts, and totally fine for kids and adults. I think kids will appreciate the silly. Grown-ups will appreciate the Muppet references and the more, I don't want to say adult humor because it's not adult humor, the more intelligent humor, certainly more intelligent humor than the next film we're going to talk about. And also humor it's like Looney Tunes was, it shoots that humor out there, and if you get it, fine. If you don't, you still appreciate that it's funny, but it's not aiming so low that they're desperate that, afraid nobody's going to get it. So I think Muppets Most Wanted is extremely high on my list of what you should rent this week, or perhaps even buy if you're so inclined. I thought it was funny and fun and catchy, and it just puts a smile on your face, and not a whole lot of movies do that anymore, including the next film I'm about to talk about. Giving them a little time to cue it up in there. So, Marlon Wayans of the Wayans clan, they of In Living Color, and I'm Gonna Get You Sucka, which is how I prefer to think of the Wayans clan, is back with another horror movie spoof. The last time out, he was in a haunted house. This time out, he's in a haunted house 2. Sorry, Flashbacks. This was awful crap. This was really awful crap. Now, I have to admit that I only watched about 20 minutes of this movie because it was so excruciatingly awful and crude and offensive and hateful and dumb that I just said, damn it, life is too short, and Sharknado 2 is waiting for me. So I shut it off. It's funny, Cricket kept walking in the room and she's like, why are you still watching this? Shut this off, because she saw the look on my face that was not unlike being constipated, actually. I think I was emotionally constipated. I couldn't let my love flow like a mountain stream. So basically this is exactly the same as the first movie, where it's a spoof of, it's like the scary movies were, which I thought were also crap. It's like, oh geez, what 3 horror movies have come out since the last one of these we did? Let's spoof those, regardless of the fact that maybe by the time this movie comes out, people are not going to remember what you're spoofing. So you get Paranormal Activity in the found footage, everything is always being shot thing, although it's so lame that they kind of play real loose with that. Like, some shots aren't really clearly being shot by anybody specifically, but then they are, and then he makes references to the camera. That's the bad movie police on their way to arrest the Wayans brothers, or at least Marlon. Keene gets a pass forever for I'm Gonna Get You Sucker. That's a funny spoof movie that's really smart, unlike what his brother is doing, which is just, this is like the stupidest crap imaginable. Movies for morons, check it out. So you have Paranormal Activity. Boy, that's a really fresh target for a spoof. Then you have Sinister, if you remember that one. And then The Possession, a movie that I actually have forgotten about until they brought the box into the movie. So the danger of doing these things is that you're trying to spoof what's current and hip, but by the time the movie gets released, people are barely remembering what you're spoofing, and by the time it hits video, and maybe because I'm like a film historian to a degree, I always look backwards and I look at movies like this and I'm like, this has no shelf life. This is just, nobody's gonna get half of this stuff. And the humor is so lowbrow. I mean, and again, this falls into the category of what exactly does it take to get an R rating these days? There's this spoof of The Conjuring, where there's this creepy-looking doll, and Marlon Wayans finds it, and then it becomes him having pretty graphic sex with this doll for quite a while, and that's supposed to be hilarious. And I'm just thinking, man, this is just, there's no subtlety. I mean, you could look at the Naked Gun movies and the Airplane movies and think, this is totally a ripoff of that style. You could think that those were dumb and lowbrow and goofy, but there was a brain in it. And all this is just like basic bodily functions reduced to the lowest level and a lot of bug-eyed humor. And as a result of being controversial, if anybody paid attention to this, how the hell is Song of the South still locked up in chains and this kind of stuff gets released on a major scale? I mean, if anything is going to be detrimental to anything, stuff like this this was just awful. This is a movie that makes me angry. This is, not every film has to raise your consciousness level and make the world a better place, but this is just awful crap. Keep this away from kids. This is the kind of movie a lot of kids are going to want to watch because it's hip and it's new and it's sassy and fun, and I don't think it's fun, but you know what I mean. And this is just garbage. You will probably be made dumber by watching crap like this. And it's hard for me to talk about this movie and not use profanity because it makes me that angry. Speaking of angry, how about a little rage for you? Rage with the Cage. Cage in a Rage. Nicolas Cage plays a man with a shadowy past whose daughter is abducted one night from their home, and he decides to round up some of his old underworld buddies to go and find out who is responsible and put them down in Rage. So, it's the Ragin Cajun, which is the title of it was on a video box when I was a kid back in high school. We used to go to the video store on Friday nights and look for usually trashy, goofy movies to watch as our group of friends. And one of the titles that I always remembered and I always laugh about was The Ragin Cajun. And that's what you get here. Although he's not from New Orleans in this film, although, come to think of it, maybe it does take place in New Orleans, but he's not Cajun. Anyway, so I'd never heard of this movie. And as we say in the show, if it's a movie with stars you've heard of and a movie you haven't, there's usually a good reason why you haven't heard of it. This is a revenge movie, vigilante revenge movie, and it's for the most part pretty well shot, except in the action scenes, unfortunately. So when it comes to the moments of revenge and fisticuffs and car chases, again, it's pretty much thrown away, and you really can't make out what's going on to the degree where you would be impressed by it. But there's enough of that seething anger and hatred and revenge that I like in a good revenge movie that this carried my interest throughout. This is definitely a rental. I could see why this wasn't in theaters. It's not really strong enough to be in theaters. Nicolas Cage gives sort of a standard Nicolas Cage performance where there are moments where if you are one who would be inclined to laugh at Nicolas Cage when he's very emotional, there will be moments that you will enjoy in this film. Danny Glover is actually pretty solid as a police detective who is trying to, find the kidnappers before Cage does, because he knows if Cage finds them first, he'll be finding them second and they won't be breeding. It's interesting that it goes in a direction I didn't expect, and that's nice for a revenge movie, because while I'm watching this, there are a couple of characters and I'm like, okay, here's the deal. It's this character's behind it and this is why, and there's going to be a tearful confession at the end of the movie and whatever. It didn't go that way. It went in a direction that I did not see coming, which was really cool, and a direction that reminded me of 70s movies in a way, which is hard to describe without blabbering too much. But it was interesting. If you like Nicolas Cage, if you like revenge movies, Rage is probably not a bad rental. It's a movie that once it leaves the perimeter of the video store, probably nobody will ever touch again or remember. Title like Rage, what is it? There was a George C. Scott movie called Rage years ago. That one's probably better. But it's worth a rental. It's interesting. Speaking of interesting, this next one's very interesting. Tom Hardy plays a man in a car talking on the phone whose life slowly unravels over the course of 90 minutes in Locke. Hi. Oftentimes I think back to years past when films would be imported from overseas and an American distributor would get them and they would do something to goose it, to make it a bit more marketable or exciting. And I just, as this trailer was ending, I was thinking, road rage. Picture of Tom Hardy going behind the wheel on the phone might have been how an American distributor sold this years ago, even though this is really an art house movie. I had seen the trailer for this at the Colonial, as a matter of fact, in front of something else, and I remember thinking, ooh, this could be really boring. This is a guy in a car on a phone for 90 minutes, and it looks like it might be hard to look at with all kinds of crazy camera moves and ways to shoot something, focusing on a droplet of water rather than the guy. This doesn't do any of that. This is a guy on the phone in a car for 90 minutes, but it's really interesting. I mean, Tom Hardy is such a good actor who I like a lot. He was in, if you've never seen a movie called Bronson, it's really weird. It feels like the movie Stanley Kubrick would have made the year after Clockwork Orange if he decided to stay in that style. British movie from a couple years ago, Bronson, rentable, very, very good. He was in this terrible film called This Means War with Chris Pine and Reese Witherspoon, and he's going to be Mad Max in the new Mad Max movie, Mad Max Fury Road, which I'm actually really looking forward to. So he's very dependable. And he was Bane in that Batman movie you may have heard of. So anyway, Tom Hardy's really good, and this whole film rests on him sitting, talking to disembodied voices in his car for the full running time, and it's never boring, it's always interesting, it's very dramatic and exciting, and you see this guy who is on this drive from his work site to this other place, I don't want to give anything away, who he made a mistake in his life, and this drive is him trying to do the right thing by that mistake while everything else in his life just erodes and crumbles around him. And it's fascinating to see this guy try to keep it together, try to put out a lot of fires, and it did not go... Okay, I'm not going to give away the ending. I just thought he's going to have an accident. And the movie didn't do that, and that made me happy. He does not necessarily better off at the end of the movie than at the beginning, but they don't take a cop-out and have the very hack Hollywood thing of he's driving, you see a shot from the side, and you see headlights, and it cuts to black. So for me, the best thing I saw on video this weekend is probably Locke. This was really, really good. This is a movie that probably not a lot of people are going to rent because it's not commercial and Hollywood and poppy, but it's really, really good. And I don't think it loses anything from being on the small screen because it's a guy in a car talking on the phone. Up next, okay, here's an extracurricular one. I believe Video Headquarters has this. If not, ask around. It's out on video this week. Barbara Steele, 60s European Eurocult film star, returns to the screen as a woman with a deep, dark secret looking after her neighbor's daughter. What secrets lie in the butterfly room? I'd like to end the show with a life-affirming tale for the whole family. This was one that I saw yesterday, as a matter of fact. And like I said earlier with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I really wasn't bringing anything to the table with that one emotionally. With this one, I kind of was. Big fan of horror movies, as you may or may not know. You can check the t-shirt there. And to me, the idea that Barbara Steele was starring in a movie for the first time in, I think, 30 or more years was pretty exciting. And the supporting cast, as they show in the trailer, is a lot of familiar faces for horror fans from horror movies past and present. Ray Wise, to me, they list Jeepers Creepers 2, which amuses me. Box covers will always do that. They'll say, starring, Sir Laurence Olivier, and they'll say, you know, the jazz singer. They'll say the most recent thing they've done just because it's fresh in people's minds rather than the most important thing they've done. Ray Wise is best known for being in Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks, and he was the original Alec Holland in Swamp Thing. And he was also in Jeepers Creepers too. It's a really interesting cast. It's a very small cast. There are not many more people than you see in the trailer. It's only a handful of people who are in this. And it takes place primarily in Barbara Steele's apartment building. And it's, I don't know if you know the term giallo. It's Italian horror thriller from the 70s. They had a certain style. They were based on mystery books from a certain period of time. And this is intended to be one of those. I think it's a U.S.-Italian co-production. It has the feel of a giallo film from the 70s or early 80s. So it's not slow-paced. It held my interest the whole time, but it's not fast-paced. It's a very slow build, and it's told sort of non-linearly, so you get bits and pieces of why Barbara Steele is crazy in this movie. And it's a sense of dread builds over the course of the film and then sort of explodes at the end of the movie. I thought it was really well shot, which is unusual for a horror film these days. They use tripods, which is a plus. Nice to see the cast that's in this. It wasn't great. This is almost more that's interesting to see for what it is rather than how it is. There were times where the acting was not great, and I wondered if, had I seen this the way I'd seen all giallo films, which is dubbed into English from another language, even if it was different voices, if they had slightly better actors dubbing them, this might have worked better. I even wonder if I watched this with another language and subtitled this, if it may play better, because visually it's really solid, and visually the acting is solid, but just some of the line readings are a little off and not great. And I don't know if that's to do with maybe the filmmakers not having English as their first language, or if it was more style over substance that they were going for. But I would say if you're a horror fan, if you're a Barbara Steele fan especially, but if you're a fan of older, more leisurely horror films, it's really one worth checking out. It's not going to get a lot of advertising push. If the video store gets it, they're probably only going to get one copy, and the cover is not anything that really indicates anything terribly interesting, but it is kind of interesting. It reminds me of certain moments were right out of an Argento film from the early 70s. So The Butterfly Room is pretty well worth taking a look at if you're into that sort of thing. If not, you probably won't like it. If you're into fast-paced found footage camcorder horror movies, you're just going to be bored by this. But if you want to see some faces you haven't seen in a while, like PJ Souls in a movie, or like Camille Keaton briefly. Everybody who's not Barbara Steele and Ray Wise are not in it very much. Heather Langenkamp has a bit of a lengthy part. They're interesting to see. And there are moments where I'm just like, oh boy, you could have fixed that. Like a character who's supposed to be dead, you can see breathing. That's not good. A character who's supposed to be dead, you can see blink. That's not good. So there are flaws. Some might say major flaws when a dead person blinks, but you know, hey. So that's all we had at the video store today, and we thank our friends at Video Headquarters. Those will all be available on Tuesday. Coming up next week in the theater, we have something that I am looking forward to with bated breath and crossed fingers, and that's Expendables 3. Hated the first Expendables, love the second Expendables. Hopefully 3 will be on par with number 2 and not number 1. This film called Let's Be Cops, which to me looks awful, and I dread having to go see, but maybe I'll be wrong about that. The Giver, which is a sci-fi tale based on a popular young adult novel that I've never read, and something with Chloe Grace Moretz called If I Stay, which looks like a tearjerker. It looks to me like if a couple wants to go to the movies and they can't agree on a film, probably the guy should go to see Expendables and the girl should go to see If I Stay, and probably they can come back and both say they saw a good movie. So that's all about that stuff. I wanted to say shamelessly, because I have a minute or two and Tom's not here, if you want to see previous episodes of this here program, I put them on YouTube. So they're on YouTube. And if you want to hear me babble more, some friends and I do a podcast we lovingly refer to as The Film Basement, and that is available on iTunes and thefilmbasement.com and stuff like that. Endless hours of us babbling about movies with the occasional cuss word to spice things up. Until then, I will probably be back next week. I certainly will be back next week. Tom probably will be back next week. Either way, somebody will be sitting in this chair yakking about movies on the Cinemaniacs. Bye.